Recording in progress. You may start, Prof. Morris.
Great. Thank you very much, Rochelle. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the to this launch of the 6th Quality of Life Survey from the GCRO. My name is Professor Lynn Morris. I am the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation at Wits University. I'd also like to welcome everybody to this launch. I believe the Premier will be joining us later. I'd also like to acknowledge other GCRO board members, mayors, councillors, and other dignitaries. And also just to send apologies from Professor Sarab Sinha, who's the DVC at UJ, who was unfortunately unable to make it. I'd also like to acknowledge the 2 previous GCRO executive directors who obviously were critical to the launch of this important work, Dr. Rob Moore, who I believe is joining us all the way from Germany, and Dr. David Everott. I'd also like to acknowledge the whole team, and you're going to hear from the whole team, expertly led by Julia Decat and her team, Satembo Pollen Kize, Christian Haman, Dr. Alexandra Parker, Yasin Naidu, Melinda Swift, Ruth Mohammed, Graham Gotts, and all the GCRO staff. And also to acknowledge, very importantly, the Geospace team and field workers for making this survey happen through a pandemic and a cyclone. We've also actually been able to ensure the participation of all our field workers and students by issuing them some data vouchers, so welcome. And of course, all of our panelists that you're going to hear from later, and I'm going to leave Rashid to introduce them later. But I do just want to say, the GCRO is really a unique a unique research entity because it's a partnership between the Gauteng Provincial Government, the University of the Witwatersrand, the University of Johannesburg, and organised government, SALGA, South African Local Government Association in Gauteng. And since it started in 2009, the GCRO has conducted these large-scale, province-wide, randomly sampled surveys of adult residents every 2 years. And these surveys have become the GCRO's flagship project, and that's why we're doing this special launch. And it's one of South Africa's largest and longest running social surveys, and it provides regularly updated insights into socioeconomic circumstances, levels of satisfaction with services and government, socio-political perspective, psychosocial attitudes, and other related characteristics of adult residents of the GCR. And so data collected from these surveys took place from October 2020 to May 2021. And just remember, that was in the context of a province very hard hit by the COVID pandemic, as well as the lockdown. And so I'm going to be the program director, but I am going to hand over to Mr. Rashid Sadat, who is the new GCRO executive director. And I'd like to welcome him and also thank him for literally taking over and hit the ground running. And to be present and to be, managing this very impressive team and this launch of this very important data. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Rashid.
Well, good morning all. Thank you very much, Professor Lynn Morris, for your introductory remarks. I think that since no one's introduced you, Prof. Morris, I'm going to do that so everyone knows who you are. Prof. Morris is the Deputy Chairperson of the Board of the GCRO, and she's here in that capacity. But she's also Wits University's Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation. Prof. Morris is an A-rated, internationally recognized scientist with demonstrable experience in research management and leadership. She completed her undergraduate studies at Wits University and obtained a DPhil from the University of Oxford. She was previously the interim executive director of the NICD, that's the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, and has led the NICD through two major health crises, the listeria outbreak of 2017-18, and of course, the current COVID-19 pandemic. She's also a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa and a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. She's a member of the Royal Society of South Africa and the World Academy of Sciences. A very sort of eminent scientist who is now leading research and innovation at Wits University. And we have the pleasure of having her as our deputy chairperson. So let me just shift gear a little bit and say that at the outset, let me say that we are absolutely overwhelmed by the phenomenal response that we received to our invitation to this particular launch. As of this morning, some 570 people have registered as participants. They may not all be online at the moment, and we'll see some coming and going, but we expect a very substantial number of people to be present. So today, and I'm not going to mention names because I think it will get me into a lot of trouble. So I'm going to mention the kinds of people who have registered. We have statisticians, we have national, provincial, and local government officials, we have consultants, we have university academics, we have researchers drawn from public and private institutions, we have representatives of business organizations, members of the media, elected representatives from all spheres of government, and members of civil society organizations. So as you can see, a very wide range of people and the institutional affiliations as well. So the GCRO's Quality of Life Survey is one of the largest and longest running social surveys in South Africa, as Prof. Morris mentioned. It is conducted biannually through face-to-face interviews with a sample size of 13,616 in its current iteration. I should say biannually, which means every 2 years, not biannually, which is twice a year. So quite fortuitously, my household was sampled and I was interviewed, making me one of the 13,616 interviewees. But that was some 2 months before I was formally appointed to my current position as the executive director of the GCRO. The survey stands up to scrutiny in terms of methodological rigor, with careful attention being paid to questionnaire development, fieldwork, backchecking, and feedback, sampling and weighting. And I think that's really a testament to the work that the GCRO staff members, including the EDs, as Prof. Morris was saying, have perfected, if you like, over the years. It has always been an extremely useful and insightful resource for strategic planning and for developing new policy pathways for officials and elected representatives alike. Moreover, it has been used by politicians across the political spectrum, and I think it's very important to say, as a source of credible data, and has similarly been utilized by a very wide range of local and international researchers interested in the dynamics of the Gauteng City region. There is no doubt that 2020 and this year, 2021, will go down in the history of the world as an absolutely extraordinary period. The emergence of COVID-19 pandemic has led to severe disruptions to normal economic activity, commuting, recreational activities, and general social interaction. So it was in this context that the fieldwork for the survey, for this particular survey, took place between October 2020 and May 2021. And this has meant that the data collection was conducted in the aftermath of the initial extremely stringent lockdown period and the first peak of the COVID-19 infections in June, July, and continued through much of the second peak in COVID-19 infections in December 2020 and January 2021. So how do we manage this? It was managed, the COVID protocols were meticulously adhered to throughout data collection, protecting the well-being of both respondents and fieldwork team members. Nonetheless, COVID-19 compounded the pre-existing challenges faced by field workers in overcoming high levels of reticence to secure appropriate sampled interviews with a representative sample of all residents of Gauteng. The results of the survey reflect the mood of the city region confronted by a new, uncertain, and challenging social and economic reality brought about by the pandemic. But I leave the results of the survey in the capable hands of my colleagues, Dr. Julia De Cat and Graham Gotts, and allow me to introduce them. Firstly, Julia De Cut is a senior researcher at the GCRO. Julia has led the Quality of Life 6 survey. She has a strong interest in research methods, including the implementation and analysis of large-scale surveys. She draws on data to better understand post-apartheid South Africa, with a particular focus on issues of quality of life and well-being, health, education, and youth. She holds a PhD from Wits University. The other presenter is Graham Gotts, who's the GCRO Director of Research Strategy. Before joining the GCRO in July 2009, and is currently the longest serving staff member of the GCRO, Graham worked as a research consultant on local government and urban development, and then later on worked on strategy development as an official in the city of Johannesburg. He has research interests in the areas of city development and urban renewal, urban economic development, local government, government strategy, urban sustainability, intergovernmental relations, and state theory. He has worked in various capacities on all 6 iterations of GCRO's Quality of Life survey. Thank you very much, Julia and Graham. I hope and I wish you well in your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rashid, and good morning to everybody. I'm really delighted to be able to share with you this morning, along with Graham Gotts, some of the headline findings from the GCRO's Quality of Life Survey 6. I'm going to start by providing a bit of an overview of the Quality of Life Survey project as a whole, and then also some insight into how we conducted this particular 6th iteration of the survey. As we've heard, the Quality of Life Survey is one of South Africa's largest and longest running social surveys, with a new iteration following every 2 years since its initiation in 2009. In each of our survey iterations, we've randomly sampled adults and interviewed them at their homes in every ward in the province. Since 2011, each survey has included well over 10,000 respondents. We design our samples such that data is representative at the ward, municipal, and provincial level of the adult population. Because interviews are conducted at people's homes, we know where each and every interview is conducted, meaning we can map our data in many different ways. Over time, we've been able to keep our methodology largely consistent, along with much of the core questionnaire content. This means that our data is broadly comparable over time and can be used to monitor progress as well as identify new challenges as they arise. The nature of our survey means that the data we collect has value going well beyond the particular moment in which it was collected and beyond the particular questions it was initially designed to answer. This was highlighted for us in March 2020 when GCRO researchers came together online to explore how we could support GCRO, how we could support Gauteng province in facing the arrival of COVID-19. Using the data from our Quality of Life Survey 5 from 2017-18, we were able to very rapidly compile 2 vulnerability indices for the province. One on risk factors that might exacerbate the risk of transmission of COVID, and one on vulnerability in the context of the lockdown. We've been able to share our COVID work with government. It's facilitated engagement with researchers nationwide and has received public attention. More recently, our work has contributed to shaping the vaccine rollout. Although we are currently living in extremely uncertain times, we are confident that the data we are sharing today is going to continue to provide value well into the future, whatever the future may look like. The Quality of Life surveys have always taken a broad and holistic approach to measuring quality of life. We consider, for example, living conditions, socioeconomic circumstances, perceptions of service delivery and government, self-reported health and well-being, perceived safety, challenges experienced, and a range of psychosocial attitudes and beliefs. Through the breadth of this content, some of which is constant over time and some shifting in response to current events and policy needs, we've been able to build up an understanding of what matters the most to the people making up our incredibly diverse province. This in turn helps yield insight that can guide work to improve well-being. The breadth of the quality of life survey is very evident in our 2016 questionnaire, which balances questions we've asked in the past with new content responding to current data needs. This year, this survey iteration, we've asked our respondents 214 questions in total, covering a broad range of themes. In this diagram here, you can see the proportion of the questionnaire dedicated to a particular topic based on the size of the particular block. We've maintained much of our core historical content, including, for example, basic services, economic circumstances, life satisfaction, and many others. In addition, we've been able to deepen some of our existing content. Key here is governance, political perceptions and attitudes, hunger and food security, and environmental risk and vulnerability. We've also been able to add crucial new content, in particular, experiences of violence, including intimate partner violence, social mobility, and of course, the impact of COVID-19. Our final quality of life 6 data set includes responses from 13,616 respondents. You can see their distribution across the province in the map over here. In each of the province's 9 municipalities, we conducted a minimum of 600 interviews and substantially more in the more densely populated municipalities. We've conducted a minimum of 20 interviews in each and every of the province's 529 wards. Obviously, and as Rashid has mentioned, collecting this data was a massive undertaking and in a completely unprecedented context. We began our final fieldworker training in September 2020 after the development of stringent COVID-19 protocols and after we had ethical approvals in place. Data collection itself began in late October 2020. Despite various challenges related in particular to the December break, a second peak of COVID-19 infections in the province, and a period of extraordinarily high rainfall, we were nonetheless able to complete all data collection in May 2021. Throughout data collection, COVID protocols were stringently adhered to, and quality control received extensive attention from both our service provider and the Gcro itself. Following completion of data collection, the data was weighted against the 2021 municipal population estimates by race and gender. And all of the results that we're presenting today are based on the weighted analysis of data. For those with more interest in the technical aspects of the survey, further detail is available in our report. With its focus on well-being, the Quality of Life survey has always been a profoundly human project. And the theme of our launch today is the human side of data. In our Qual 6 data, we can see and wish to acknowledge the real human commitment and dedication shown by our field workers and our service provider in collecting extremely high quality data across the whole of Gauteng province in a uniquely challenging context. Thank you. It's also crucial to remember today that the results we're sharing are not just dots on a map or lines on a chart. Instead, they really are the lived experiences of Gauteng's residents. Our respondents have been extraordinarily generous in sharing their time, thoughts, beliefs, and insights with us, during a profoundly traumatic period. They've entrusted us with their stories, struggles, difficulties, and their hopes. The full Gcro team has embraced the challenge of rapidly drawing meaningful insights from this wealth of survey data collected, ensuring that we are able to share today what it is that we've heard. We hope that this will inspire action. One of the questions we've asked our respondents was, what does the Gauteng City region mean to you? And throughout this presentation, we'll be sharing some of the responses we've received. This quotation here highlights the city region as a place of hope and opportunity, but also a place in which gains can rapidly be lost and deep challenges endured. This duality and the extent of loss experienced since March 2020 are very clearly reflected in our results. We can only imagine that these losses have been further exacerbated by the devastating third wave of COVID and July's social unrest, which followed the completion of our data collection. The core question we'll be answering today is about the quality of life in Gauteng and how this has shifted in recent years. To answer this question, I'll first speak to our findings about the direct impact of COVID-19 on households and on daily life in the province. I'll secondly speak to some of the evidence of deep socioeconomic distress that we see in Gauteng. I'll then hand over to my colleague Graham Gotts, who'll be sharing our findings on the province's social fabric and also falling satisfaction with government. He'll then be pulling together our findings to provide us with an understanding of just how and why overall quality of life has changed since 2017-18.
Recording stopped.
Against this backdrop, I'm now going to speak to some of our findings about the direct impact of the pandemic on households and on daily life in Gauteng, starting with reported COVID-19 infections. We asked our respondents whether they or any household member had experienced a medically confirmed COVID-19 infection. In total, 2.7% of our respondents told us that they had. We used Statistics South Africa's 2021 mid-year population estimates to extrapolate this figure to a rough estimate of 424,700 confirmed infections in the province. The official cumulative figures for COVID-19 infections by the end of May 2021 was 450,377, suggesting that our Qual survey figures are broadly representative of official test numbers. We also asked our respondents whether they'd been refused a COVID-19 test, and 2.2 of our respondents across the province had experienced this. Here we can see that Indian Asian respondents and white respondents were most likely to report confirmed COVID-19 infections in their households, but they were also the least likely to have been refused a COVID-19 test. By contrast, we see that Black African respondents were least likely to report confirmed COVID-19 infections in their households, but also were much more likely to have been refused a COVID test when requested. This data suggests that the population group distribution of COVID-19 infections reported here, and likely also in official data, is heavily influenced by uneven access to COVID testing. This graph shows a very clear relationship between
Recording in progress.
confirmed COVID-19 infections reported in the household and household income. We can see it rises with increasing household income, reaching 11% in the most affluent households. Another question that we asked is whether respondents had struggled to access healthcare since March 2020. Overall, across the province, we can see that 7% of respondents experienced this. Again, there's a strong relationship with household income, but this time operating in the opposite direction. while just under 1% of those in the most affluent households struggled to access healthcare, we see that over 11% of those in the least affluent households had done so. It seems likely that many of those who were unable to access healthcare at all would also have been unlikely to even request a COVID-19 test. And this may explain in part the less clear relationship between experiencing a test refusal and household income, although we can very clearly see that the most affluent have been protected from this experience. Again, these findings support concerns about substantial undercounting of COVID infections in the province, and that official COVID-19 infection data is likely to be highly skewed due to these variable levels of access to both healthcare and testing. We also see some variation in levels of confirmed reported COVID-19 infections, as well as levels of testing refusal at the municipal level. COVID-19 infections confirmed through a test were most likely to have been reported by respondents in Mogale City, in Midvaal, and in Lesedi. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Confirmed reported COVID-19 infections were most likely to have been experienced by respondents in Mfuleni, in the city of Johannesburg, and in Merifang. By contrast, the municipalities where respondents were most likely to report having been refused the COVID-19 test are Mogale City, Midvaal, and Lesedi. In fact, in all three of these municipalities, we can see that respondents were more likely to report having been turned away when seeking a COVID-19 test than reporting a confirmed COVID-19 infection at all. This map illustrates further variations across the province in terms of reported confirmed COVID-19 infections. And we can see that the highest rates of reported infections are found in central Johannesburg, in southern Tshwane, and in Mfuleni. We can also see relatively high rates in Merifang, southern Johannesburg and Soweto, central Tshwane, Soshanguve, central Ekurhuleni, and Tembisa and Ivory Park. We see clear evidence that households tried to protect themselves from COVID-19. We asked respondents a set of questions about what households had done to protect themselves from COVID-19, and almost all respondents reported that they had avoided indoor public spaces and gatherings, and that they'd purchased alcohol-based sanitizer. A smaller proportion reported changing where or how they buy groceries, as well as main mode of transport. We were particularly concerned to learn that of households with children, a full 39% had kept those children away from school, even after schools reopened, to protect the household from COVID-19. We see in our data that Black African households were most likely to do this, as were the least economically advantaged. We didn't collect data on exactly when or for how long children were kept out of school, making it hard to assess the exact impact of this finding. Nonetheless, this data really adds to growing concerns that the educational impacts of COVID-19 have gone far beyond formal school closures and have disproportionately impacted the children who were already the most vulnerable. We also see some evidence of changes in travel behavior across the province, and compared to previous survey iterations, we can see that in 2021, there's been a slight decrease in the proportion of respondents who say that their most frequent trip is to go to work or to look for work. By contrast, we see that the proportion whose most frequent trip is to go shopping or for leisure and entertainment purposes has increased. These changes may well relate, in part at least, to a combination of lockdown regulations and job loss. When looking at travel duration here for those people who say their most frequent trips to go shopping, it's very clear that in 2020-21, we've seen a decline in those reporting longer travel durations, and a sharp increase in those reporting trips taking them between 0 and 15 minutes. When we look at the travel duration of those who travel for purposes of work, we see a similar pattern, although this time the increase is for people who travel 0 to 30 minutes, and then the decrease follows thereafter. It's clear that COVID-19 has changed behaviors in the province, but it has also triggered an economic collapse, which has had significant implications for socioeconomic well-being. We know that Gauteng has long struggled with very high levels of income inequality, and this is still clearly evident in our 2020-21 survey results. This inequality translates into very different experiences of life in the province, as is illustrated in this figure. Over our previous survey iterations, we've seen a steady decrease in the proportion of households living below the poverty line over time. However, in 2021, poverty levels have shot back up, and we now find that 36% of households, over a third, are living in poverty. This is higher than the figure in 2013-14. Effectively, we are seeing 6 years of progress in poverty alleviation erased. If we look at the distribution of reported monthly household income over survey iterations, we can see in 2021 a notable increase in the proportion of households falling into the lowest income bracket, as well as we can also see that this increase has been driven by a decline primarily in these two categories, the working poor and lower middle income households. By contrast, if we look at the proportion of respondents falling into the highest income categories, it's clear that these proportions have remained largely constant, suggesting that the most affluent have been relatively protected from the economic implications of the COVID pandemic. The human implications of this growth in poverty is clearly visible in our data on hunger. Based on the cost of a basic basket of nutritional foods relative to household size, we find that 52% of households, over half in Gauteng, are not spending enough on food to meet the basic nutritional needs of household members. Larger households are particularly vulnerable here. We can see that for households with 6 or more members, fewer than 1 in 5 households is able to spend enough to meet the nutritional needs of members. In addition, we found that over half of households are also experiencing some degree of food insecurity, and that 18%, or almost 1 in 5 households, are experiencing severe food insecurity. Our measure of food security is detailed in our report, but draws on expenditure on food, reported whether adults or children skipped meals in the past year, and poor access to places to purchase food. We also see a continuation of the trend over time of increasing proportions of adults living in households where 1 or more adults have skipped a meal in the past year due to lack of money for food. In 2021, this figure is at 25%, or 1 in 4 households. If we look at those households with children, we can see that 1 in 5 of these households reported that children had skipped a meal because there was not enough money for food in 2020-21. Although this is a very slight decrease from the 2017-18 figure, it's nonetheless extremely concerning. It's a very marked increase from the 11% recorded in 2013-14 and has substantial implications for child health and well-being. On a more positive front, we have seen that the proportion of children benefiting from school feeding schemes has continued to increase. 44% of households with children reported that children are now benefiting from school feeding schemes. This is despite a rather bumpy interruption to many of these feeding schemes in the early stages of the lockdown. This is really exceptionally good news given the crucial importance of child nutrition to child health, well-being and development, and more so in a context in which households are struggling to provide enough nutritious food. Oops. Some additional good news comes in our data on access to the 350 Rand Social Relief of Distress grant. And we asked our respondents whether they or another adult member of the household had applied for this grant. And province-wide, 35% of respondents reported that somebody had. In households where somebody applied for the grant, 67% reported that somebody had received the grant. Overall, across the province, this means that 23% of households had an adult, one or more adults receiving this grant. That is almost a quarter of households. We also see that 13% of households reported benefiting from food support since March 2020. These are encouraging findings. It's evident, though, that the SRD grant really had greater reach than food support initiatives, highlighting the particular value of sustainable cash grants in supporting residents in need. Having highlighted the extent of socioeconomic distress that we're seeing in Gauteng province, I'll now speak briefly to some of the demographic and socioeconomic variations in exposure to a range of economic impacts resulting from the pandemic. I'll speak to 5 different impacts, starting with experiencing reductions in salaries and working hours since March 2020. Here we can see that of respondents who were previously working, 30% reported that they'd had their salary and working hours reduced since March 2020. Some of the findings in terms of the demographic distribution of these impacts are a little surprising. We see that they were most frequently reported by coloured and white respondents, by male respondents, and those with relatively higher levels of education. When we look at our second indicator, which is loss of jobs, a potential explanation for this becomes clear. Here we can see that of those who were working, a total of 18% experienced a job loss since March 2020. However, for some of those groups who were most likely to report having experienced a reduction in salary and working hours, we can see that they were notably less likely to report losing a job. We see this particularly for those with tertiary education and for white respondents. In combination, these results suggest that many of the more advantaged members of society suffered some economic loss through salary reduction, but were more likely to be able to retain their employment. By contrast, more vulnerable individuals were more likely to lose their employment altogether. We also asked our respondents whether they'd had to close a business since March 2020. This is our third indicator. Of those who had had businesses, 10% had permanently closed a business. Variations across the population are less clear for this indicator, although there does appear to be a degree of protection for white and coloured respondents. Of course, the fact that a respondent lost a job or closed a business since March 2020 is no guarantee that they were still unemployed by the time that we interviewed them. Here we share some findings about the extent to which people were able to return to work. Overall, the findings are not enormously encouraging. Of those who'd lost a job or closed a business, we found that 50% of them remained unemployed and looking for work, or discouraged and had stopped looking for work. since March 2020, since we interviewed them. A further 7% had dropped out of the labour market altogether, while 44% had found new employment. There are also very clear demographic variations in terms of which groups are most likely to have recovered. We see that white respondents are more likely to have been able to resume work compared to members of other population groups. 52% of white respondents had found a new job. We also see that male respondents were more likely to be able to return to employment, as were those with tertiary education. Of course, economic challenges in the context of COVID-19 go well beyond job loss and business closures. And our fourth indicator relates to the extent to which respondents report that they've had to spend more time on caregiving for dependents since March 2020. Here we look at those respondents in the labour market, that is those looking for work or working, noting that caregiving responsibilities may impact their ability to either work or look for work. We see that 41% of respondents in the province in the labour market indicated to us that their caregiving responsibilities had increased since March 2020. We do see some variation by population group here, but the most striking difference is that between male and female respondents. We see that fewer than 1/3 of male respondents reported additional caregiving responsibilities, while over half of females, 52% of our female respondents, reported that they were doing so. Our final indicator relates to the extent to which health impacts on the ability to do daily work. And in the province as a whole, we found that 23% of respondents indicated that their health was impacting on their ability to do daily work. Here again, we can see the disproportionate impact on women. We also see that white respondents and those with higher levels of education were relatively protected. When we combine these 5 different indicators and look at them together, we can see that 45% of respondents were not impacted by any of the factors discussed, while 55% were, 37% impacted by one factor, 13% by 2, and the balance by higher numbers of factors. Our data indicates that those who were impacted by one or more of these factors have also been much more likely to experience a variety of other challenges in their lives. Here we can see at the provincial level, respondents who had debt and reported missing a debt repayment in the past 3 months. In orange, we have respondents who were directly impacted, and in green, those who were not directly impacted. Those who were directly impacted are notably more likely to have missed a debt repayment. This trend is clearly evident across almost all of the income categories. Similarly, here we can see variations in whether respondents lived in households where adults had skipped meals in the past year. Those who were directly impacted were more likely to live in households where adults had missed meals. Over the past, the results we've shared on socioeconomic distress highlight that while almost everyone has suffered over the past year and a half, white respondents, men, and the most highly educated have been least likely to be impacted, while Black African respondents, women, and those with lower levels of education have really been hit the hardest. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Graham Gotts, who will be sharing some of our findings on the province's social fabric.
Great, thanks very, very much, Julia. I'm going to do the second half of this presentation, and I'm going to talk about 3 sections in in the next half an hour or so. First, dealing with the province's social fabric. Secondly, dealing with government satisfaction. And thirdly, I'm going to bring this all together by talking about how this translates into overall measured quality of life, according to the Quality of Life Survey. Now, it needs to be recognized that the Quality of Life Survey asks a bank of questions that are somewhat unique in that they get at things that other surveys don't typically ask around. So most surveys, of course, focus on the objective factors of social and economic circumstances. And as you've seen, of course, the Quality of Life Survey also does that. Julia has spoken quite a bit about this. But to really assess multidimensional quality of life, the Quality of Life Survey asks various questions that have to do with psychological well-being, what we might call psychosocial conditions, those perceptions, attitudes, and opinions, basically how people feel about themselves and feel about themselves in relation to others. And we call this collectively the social fabric. Now, in this iteration of the Quality of Life Survey, we've also asked a bank of questions that are new, and we've asked them in a new way. Typically, what you'd see in a Quality of Life Survey is that the field worker would be asking the respondent the question and writing their responses on a tablet. This time around, we included a bank of questions that have to do with experiences of violence. And we asked respondents to auto-complete a part of the questionnaire in order to really give them the comfort that they could answer these questions, these sensitive questions, without feeling in any way exposed. We asked around, and about 87% of respondents filled in this section of the questionnaire. Now, we asked about childhood abuse, any physical or sexual violence that a respondent experienced before they were 18. We asked about adult trauma, we asked about rape, and we asked about intimate partner violence. I'm going to talk first about violence experienced during childhood. And you can see here, the results are incredibly shocking. 66% of respondents across Gauteng overall experienced some kind of abuse when they were children. And this is made up of the components in the bottom section of this graph. You can see here that 65% of respondents experienced some kind of physical abuse, and 11% experienced some kind of sexual abuse. Physical abuse is being beaten with a belt or stick or some other object. It differs by gender. In this graph, 68% of males experience some kind of physical abuse, and that's driven, experience some kind of childhood abuse, and that's driven by physical abuse. Women obviously experienced more childhood sexual abuse than men. Looking at adult physical trauma, we also see lower percentages, but equally shocking results. 16% overall across Gauteng experienced some kind of adult physical trauma in the last year. It's lower for women at 12% than for men. At 20%. You can see here that 10% of respondents overall experienced being threatened or hurt by a weapon in the last year. That's extraordinary. And we can break this data down by various other variables. So if you look at this by age, it's remarkable to see that 31% of young males of the age of 18 to 24 experienced some kind of physical trauma in the last year. That's a third of all adult males in that age category, which we find truly, truly remarkable and very, very concerning. Rape, 1.5% of respondents across Gauteng experienced rape in the past year. This is slightly higher for women than it is for men, but it needs to be noted that is 20 times what you would see in the official police statistics for 2019-2020. 3.3% of respondents experienced some kind of intimate partner violence in the past year, either sexual or physical, higher for women at 5.1% than for men at 1.5%. In every qual survey, we asked around crime. Now, it's really interesting to see that most respondents have actually experienced less crime in the last year, and this is possibly due to lockdown conditions. If you look at the last part of this graph, 23% of respondents experienced crime in the last survey, 2017-18, and that dropped 4 percentage points to 19%. It was true for every population group except for whites, which has seen a consistent increase over the last couple of surveys. This time around, increasingly, yes, marginally, but still increasing from 20% to 21% experiencing crime in the last year. Now, there's the actual experience of crime, and then there's the perception of crime. And it's fair to say that a number of different indicators.
Because I'm
Getting a little bit, sorry about that. It's fair to say that on a number of questions, we're seeing that the perceptions of crime situation has not improved. So we asked the question, do you think that crime has improved, stayed the same, or got worse? And for the last 3 surveys, 21% say that the crime situation has improved. There's a slight reduction in the percentage saying that it has got worse from 45% to 43% this time around, but that is not a significant change. We also asked the question, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing your community? And over a period of time, some variables have increased, for example, 15% up to 24% over the last couple of surveys are saying unemployment is the biggest challenge. Similarly, there's been an increase in the percentage saying lack of basic services. There's been a decline. In the early days, some will remember this was on an upward trend, but this is now going down. But the real takeaway from this graph is that the biggest community challenge identified by a third of respondents has been crime, and that has remained static over the last couple of surveys. Respondents are increasingly feeling less safe at night, but more safe at home. So you can see there's been a heartening increase in the percentage of respondents saying they feel less safe there's been a heartening increase in the percentage saying they feel safe at home from 81% to 86%. That's very encouraging. Possibly that's due to the fact that people spent more time at home. But the percentage saying that they feel safe walking after dark has dropped from 23% last time around to 18% this time around. And look at the big drop in the satisfaction with government safety and security services that goes alongside this. For the last couple of surveys, we've asked a set of questions around depression. Now, this might be a little bit of a complicated graph to explain, but basically what we are using is a very well-established diagnostic instrument known as the PHQ-2 Questionnaire Diagnostic. It basically asks, over the last 2 weeks, how often, how many days have you been bothered by little interest or pleasure in doing things, or feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? Now, if people say not at all, they get a score of 0 for those 2 questions. A few days, score of 1. More than half the days, score of 2. And nearly every day, a score of 3. And then we combine the scores for these 2 questions for a total score of 6. If the total score is 0 to 2, there's a low risk of depression. If it's between 3 and 6, there's a high risk of depression. Now, the percentage of respondents experiencing high risk of depression has increased from 12% to 14% this time around. And we can cut the overall figure of depression by a number of different variables. So I'm pulling forward some of the things that Julia spoke to you a little bit earlier about, and trying to work out to what extent various people in various conditions are experiencing depression. So remember the stuff around food security that Julia presented. You can see here that those who experience little or no food insecurity, 90% are at low risk of depression, 10% are at high risk of depression. But compare that with those experiencing severe food insecurity. More than double are experiencing a high risk of depression. Similarly, remember those economic factors, those 5 factors that Julia spoke about. You can basically see here that if you weren't impacted at all by any of those economic factors, 10% are experiencing a high risk of depression, but it's double that for those who are impacted by 3 or more factors. And we've also looked at this in relation to the violence that I've just spoken about. For those who experienced intimate partner violence in the last year, 23%, almost double the Gauteng average, are experiencing a high risk of depression. Now, in every quality of life survey since the start, we've asked a bunch of questions around what we call life satisfaction. And this has to do about how people feel about themselves and others around them, their immediate social safety net. We ask around satisfaction with marriage, relationship, satisfaction with family life, satisfaction with friends. Graphed on this slide is dissatisfaction with those three variables. Dissatisfaction with marriage has jumped around a bit over the surveys, but you can see there's been a notable uptick from 6% dissatisfied with marriage relationship to 9% this time around. A 5% percentage point jump in those dissatisfied with family life, the time spent with family and what done with family, up from 13% to 18%, and a slight increase in the percentage saying they are dissatisfied with friends. So that immediate social safety net is under stress, we think. Now, this is a very negative picture, we realize. However, alongside evidence of societal trauma, anxiety, and depression, there's also hearteningly some very positive signs of greater social cohesion and less extreme views. And we're asking ourselves, in the face of this extraordinary crisis that the society is experiencing, is there evidence of people also wanting to pull together, to feel that they are in this together with other people? There's been a decrease, very hearteningly, in the percentage of respondents saying that no one cares about them. Again, if you look at the end of this graph, you can see that it was on an upward trend from 2015-16 to 2017-18. But it's come down quite dramatically from 32% saying no one cares about them to 26%. And again, it's true for all population groups, and notice how it's been on a consistent downward trend for whites. There's also been a small improvement in the percentage of respondents saying that it cannot influence developments, a sense of empowerment over their circumstances. Again, we've seen a decrease. It wasn't an upward trend, but we've seen a decrease in the percentage saying that they cannot influence developments in the community around them. This is a very heartening slide indeed. There's been a dramatic increase and an upward trend over the years, reinforced this last time around, with those respondents saying that we can trust our neighbors or the community members in our immediate surroundings. Last time around, 28% felt they could trust their neighbors. This time around, it's 37%. And look at Indians and whites. That is a dramatically improved picture from what it was a few years ago. We've asked this question very regularly. It says basically, do you agree that blacks and whites will never be able to trust each other? So if things come down here, it's good because people are not agreeing with that statement. We can't trust each other. There's been a heartening increase. It was going up. There's been a heartening decrease from 64% down to 60% of those people saying, we don't think that blacks and whites, we think that blacks and whites will never be able to trust each other. It's always higher for Africans, that lack of trust, than it is for whites. And in particular, look at that steep and steady and quite dramatic decline for white respondents. There's also very heartening evidence in terms of social cohesion, of greater levels of participation in social activities and forms of participatory governance, in spite of what we've seen with lockdown. So the percentage of people participating in social activities, these are church groups, social clubs and societies, etc., has increased from 64% to 68%. And for participatory governance, this is attendance in ward committees, Maywell and Bezos, and so on and so forth. There's been a small, but nonetheless positive increase from 49% to 51%. And lastly, in this section, we see encouraging signs that violent attitudes or intolerance towards others and vulnerable groups has softened over the last year. We asked the question, do you think it's acceptable to be violent to gays and lesbians? The blue here is good. We strongly disagree, or we disagree that it's okay to be violent to those groups. And we can see here there's been a steady improvement over the years, and this is now sitting at over 90% disagreeing that it's okay, it's acceptable to be violent to gays and lesbians. This is a uniquely quality of life survey question. We put it to respondents that there are three friends arguing with each other. One says, legal foreigners are okay. Another says, foreigners should be allowed to stay, it's fine. Or it doesn't matter what their status is. And there's the third friend saying, send all foreigners home, regardless of their whether they have papers or not. And you can see very encouragingly that the percentage who are saying send all foreigners home, those with extreme views, has decreased from 23% to 17%, and again to 13% this time round. I'm going to shift across to talk about satisfaction with government. And you can see from the heading there that there's been a significant slide in overall satisfaction with government over the last quality of life survey. I'm going to talk to this in two parts. I'm going to talk firstly about some of the broad factors that we think, over and above what we've spoken about already, what some of the factors are that shape satisfaction with government. And then I'm going to show you how satisfaction with government has changed in this last survey. Now, to pull forward what some of what Julia was speaking about, 23% of respondents say that they or someone in their household received the COVID-19 social relief and distress grant. 13% of respondents say their household received some kind of food support since March 2020. So positively impacting upon satisfaction with government is surely the fact that government has indeed come to the party and tried to help those most vulnerable, most in need during this crisis under the pandemic. And indeed, when we asked respondents, are you satisfied or not with government's response to COVID, we can see here, this is the blue, that overall 62% are satisfied with government's response to COVID. And it doesn't vary much by race. Also very hearteningly, when we look at hard service delivery, hard infrastructure, we can see that there's been a great deal of stability in the percentage saying they have access to basic household services. And indeed, there's been a small uptick in the last quality of life survey. So 93% of respondents are saying they have adequate sanitation, they have piped water in their dwelling or in their yard, and they have electricity for lighting. It's fair to say that the percentage saying they have refuse removed once a week is not holding up as well. It declined between 2015-16 and 2017-18, but it's held static at 83% between those two survey years. And when we look in detail at particular municipalities, we can see how this breaks down in different parts of the province. Some municipalities have actually seen an increase, very hearteningly. Ekurhuleni from 88% up to 91%, Johannesburg 86% to 89%. But look at Mfuleni. Last time around, this was already a drop from the previous quality of life survey. Last time around in 2017-18, 59% said they had received waste collection once a week, and it's plummeted all the way down to 26%. So basically what we think we're seeing is that where services rely on hard infrastructure investments, they're keeping pace. But where services are about the efficiency of operations, it's clear that COVID has had some kind of impact on service operations. And you can see this too in this next graph. Again, a slightly complicated graph, which I'll dissect. This basically looks at the percentage with water interruptions at least once a month and the percent with electricity interruptions at least once a month. Water is in blue, and you can basically see that there's 30% last time round said they had water interruptions at least once a month, up to 33% this time round. It's declined in some municipalities, such as Ekurhuleni, but there's been big jumps in other municipalities, such as Johannesburg. Electricity is a notable story here. There's been a dramatic increase in the percentage saying that they have seen electricity interruptions at least once a month, up from 35% last time round, up to 67%. Now, obviously, we understand that this is a load shedding story, and municipalities have little control over that, but it is also fair to say that if you look across the different municipalities, some municipalities are doing better than others in terms of being able to manage the extent to which respondents are facing electricity interruptions. We've also historically asked the questions, do you think that officials adhere to the principles of Batopeli, putting people first? And we can see here that last time around, 52% of respondents said, no, officials do not do their best in terms of how they treat customers on the front line. This time around, it's dramatically increased up to 70%, saying that they don't think officials adhere to the principles of Batapele. There's also evidence of low levels of trust in government generally and low confidence in the future. Only a quarter, 24%, say that they trust the current leaders in government. Just 17% agree that the leaders of different parts of government in Gauteng work well together. And only 18% agree that leaders include most stakeholders in government decision-making. We've asked this question historically, and again this time around, do you agree or disagree that the country is going in the wrong direction? The red and the pink is bad, and you can see here that over 62% of respondents either strongly agree or agree that the country is going in the wrong direction. And you can see that uptick in the last quality of life survey. We've also asked a whole bunch of new questions around corruption. On this slide, we're showing responses to a question, to what extent, a set of questions, to what extent do you think it's acceptable that we see government employees giving jobs to qualified family members? 68% feel that it is not acceptable. We asked, do you think it's acceptable that we see people paying small amounts of money to speed up a service like a driver's license? 86% are saying that's unacceptable. And we asked, do you think it's acceptable to pay a small amount of money to a traffic officer to make a small offense go away? 88% are saying that's not acceptable. So in general terms, and it doesn't vary much by race, we are seeing extremely negative views towards corruption. People don't think it's acceptable. And we see this too in other variables as well. We asked the question, what is government doing the worst at? A good 52% of respondents said job creation, but a sizable chunk, 18%, said government is doing the worst at keeping government free of corruption. We also asked this question, what is the main reason people live in poverty? Again, lack of jobs is the biggest category here, but 15% said corrupt or incompetent government officials is the main reason that people live in poverty. Now, how does this combination of different factors shape up in terms of the overall measure of satisfaction with government? I'm going to show you national, provincial, and local government. And for every sphere, there's been a decrease in satisfaction that is quite noticeable. National government has declined in satisfaction from 42% satisfied or very satisfied to just 33% this time around. Provincial government has seen the biggest drop. This is really interesting for us because provincial government was going up in terms of satisfaction. It had increased to the highest of all the spheres, up to 44% in the last quality of life survey in 2017-18, even higher than national government. But it's dropped 15 percentage points down to 29%, either very satisfied or satisfied. And you see this is also true for the percentage of people dissatisfied, a dramatic increase there. Local government is historically the lowest of the three spheres and has dropped still further in 2020-21. You can see that 37% were satisfied with local government. Last time around, it's now down to 26%. And look at this big increase in dissatisfaction with local government. It obviously varies by municipality, and it varies in really interesting ways across the different municipalities we can look at over the quality of life survey years. So Kuruleni, very interestingly, was on a dramatic upward trend. They were doing something really right. But this time around, there's been a dramatic decline in overall satisfaction. Johannesburg and Tshwane jumped around a little bit more, but they too have seen quite considerable decreases in satisfaction since last time around. The only municipality that has held steady in terms of satisfaction is Midvaal. And look at Mfuleni, which declined from an already low 23% last time around to this staggeringly low 9% satisfied in this quality of life survey. This is the reverse picture mapped. This is levels of dissatisfaction. We are looking at a map of municipalities and then regions within municipalities. The deeper the red, the more dissatisfied people are. This is the results for the last quality of life survey, Qual 5, 2017-18. And you can see there that dissatisfaction concentrated in Mfuleni and parts of Tshwane. This time around, look at the deepening of the red. You can see that large parts of the West Rand, Mfuleni in particular, has increased in dissatisfaction quite considerably. And these parts of Tshwane have worsened still further. Interestingly enough, this region around Sandton, that you can see in the middle there, has decreased in dissatisfaction since last time round. Now, we're also interested in how some of the variables that we discussed earlier translate into satisfaction with government. And I'm just going to jump over a few variables here. We could do this for many, many others. We're interested in whether people impacted economically have higher or lower levels of satisfaction. The results are not particularly stark, although it is statistically significant. If you have not been impacted by any of the factors that Julia spoke about, 51% are dissatisfied with provincial government, and that is only slightly better than the provincial average of 53%. If you have been impacted by at least by 3 or more factors, 55% are dissatisfied with provincial government, again now higher than the provincial average. Okay, so there is an impact there, but it's not nearly as stark as those factors which have to do with psychosocial conditions. Okay, so we cut the data on whether people felt crime situation had improved, stayed the same, or got worse by provincial government satisfaction. For those who felt that the crime situation had improved, 37% are satisfied with provincial government, way higher than the average. For those who felt the crime situation had got worse, 23% were satisfied with provincial government. And you can see here, we also looked at depression. For those people with a high risk of depression, 26% are satisfied with provincial government compared to 29% at a lower risk of depression. So depression has an impact on how people feel about government, not just themselves. Here we're interested in this key question of whether people's perceptions of corruption have had an impact on how they perceive government. Remember that question I spoke about earlier about whether what people think is the main reason that people live in poverty. Now, for those people who say corrupt or incompetent government officials is the main reason that people live in poverty, only 20% are satisfied with provincial government. For those giving all other reasons, and this is things like jobs or history across South Africa, 31% are satisfied with provincial government. And really what that's telling us is that people who are concerned about corruption, and there are a lot of them, are far less satisfied, more dissatisfied with provincial government. And lastly, in terms of this, we were interested in the extent to which if people had received any kind of support under these COVID social safety nets, they had a higher level of satisfaction with provincial government. And it's fair to say that satisfaction with the Gauteng provincial government is higher for those people who've received support, but not by a lot. If we look at the percentage who did not apply for the COVID grant, 29% were satisfied with provincial government. That's the average. But for those who received the grant, still only 29% satisfied. It's only slightly higher than for those, this is understandable, who applied but did not get the grant. If you look at those who did not receive any food support, 28% are satisfied with provincial government. It climbed only a little to 32% for those who received some kind of food support. And really what this is doing is it's begging the question, if people are feeling that government has not taken care of them during this pandemic, what more can government do in order to drive higher levels of satisfaction amongst the population and the electorate? Now, how does this impact in overall terms on measured quality of life? You'll know, if you've seen quality of life survey presentations before, that we pull together a whole bunch of different variables into an overarching quality of life index. We've rejigged the index this time around, and we've then brought that new approach to the index back across previous quality of life surveys. This time around, the index is based on 33 questions in 7 different dimensions, 7 different areas of concern. And you can see here that these different dimensions, these areas of concern, are weighted in the index. The largest weight in the index goes to the services dimension, and then I'll tell you what these dimensions are in a second. It's not so easy to read this particular diagram on the screen. You can see that the other dimensions decrease in weighting in the overall measured quality of life. This is the answer to the poser that Julia shared with you earlier. How has overall measured quality of life in terms of this index, made up of 33 questions in 7 different dimensions, shifted this time around? In 2013-14, we saw an overall score out of 100 of 61. It increased gradually from 61 to 63 and again to 64 over the last 2 quality of life surveys. This time around, we've seen a drop of 3 points from 64 down to 61 out of 100. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but when you put 33 questions together, very small changes in the overall measure, this combined index, translate into big measured changes. And I can assure you that an overall drop of 64 down to 61 is a very, very serious weakening in the overall measured quality of life in Gauteng. Of course, we can take heart from the fact that it's not less than 60. We'll be much more concerned if that was the case, but 64 to 61 is a big drop. We can then look at the various dimensions to see which of the different areas are driving overall measured quality of life up and which are driving them down. Health, the bank of questions that make up that dimension, this is relatively stable. Socioeconomic status, as Julia has relayed to you, has seen a significant dip. Safety, and this is largely due to that question, have you actually experienced crime over the last year, has actually increased. Life satisfaction, this has got to do those questions of how do you feel about yourself and your immediate social safety net, friends, family, etc., is down. Participation is held static. Services, as we noted, has not dipped. In fact, there's been improvement there. But the big drop, the big factor driving down the overall measured quality of life is government satisfaction, from 51 all the way down to 40 this time around. And again, that's translated into that not insignificant drop from 64 to 61. We can look at this across the different municipalities. I'm not going to talk about the detail here. It'll be in the report. But just to note that every single municipality, without exception, has seen a drop in many cases by over 3 points. We're interested in how this breaks down with other demographics. Very worryingly for us, there has been a decline in the overall measured quality of life on the index for women. There was a parity previously, but here we're seeing males with a higher quality of life than females this time around. And lastly, and most worryingly, if we break it down by race, we know this from previous quality of life surveys, Africans are always less than whites, but very, very concerningly, even here, we've seen a drop of 3 points for whites from 74 to 71. The bigger concern is that the drop of Africans has pushed their measured quality of life, 62, down to 59, at a lower level than it was in 2013-14. And really what that's saying is that there's a deepening inequality in quality of life across the different population groups as shaping up under this extraordinary set of circumstances that we're facing. In conclusion, I want to pay tribute to both the field workers who've worked so tirelessly and so carefully to record what people have said to them in the course of this survey. And I also really want to thank the respondents to the survey who've given to us their really precious time, who've been so open with us and been willing to share their thoughts, their feelings, and their opinions. We feel that the quality of life survey, I'm coming back to that point that Julia started with, the human dimension of the survey. We feel that the quality of life survey has given people a voice. What have they said to us? Once again, they've said to us that COVID and the various responses to COVID have really impacted upon them. You can see this respondent saying that COVID has affected us for many months and the poor are suffering. They've spoken to us about the violence that they experience, and that's really, really concerning, the levels of trauma that our respondents are experiencing, and other dimensions of psychosocial conditions, people's opinions about themselves in their surroundings. There's some positive notes. We obviously recognize that people do give credit to the services that are provided to them, but there's also many who don't yet have basic services and certainly don't have the other means to make a livelihood as yet. And lastly, we note the point that respondents are saying to us that they really wish that government was doing more. Here's a respondent saying, I'd be happy if government could send people to our homes to find out how they can help. And this respondent saying, we really need to be able to trust our authorities, perhaps more than we're doing at the moment. So lastly, thank you very, very much. We hope that the data that we presented here today has been interesting. We hope that all of you are sitting here today, and in particular government, will engage with what we've provided you, what people have said through these graphs, through these figures, so that we can continue to develop a Gauteng city region that benefits all who live here. Thank you very much.
Okay, just give me a moment. Okay, well, Julia and Graham, that was absolutely phenomenal.
Rashid,
Was I muted? I think I was muted. Let me start again. I was saying thank you very much to Julia and Graham for a really very interesting, comprehensive and insightful presentation. I think we're with many, many dimensions, which basically reflects the nuances and the complexity of the Gauteng City region, what I call the pulse and the mood of the people out there in our households. You might have noticed that we now have well over 300 attendees. I think really exceeding all our expectations. And I know I'm going to get into trouble for inadvertently leaving someone out, but I can't really resist the temptation of mentioning some very prominent individuals who are part of this morning's discussion as attendees. So firstly, let me just acknowledge our board members, Spiritwa Latau and Dudu Zimbada, who are present as attendees. Furthermore, it has been mentioned that our former executive directors of the GCRO, Prof. David Everett and Dr. Rob Moore, are also present today. So thank you for ensuring this wonderful continuity. We have some international guests. I've seen Leah Brum from Metropolis, also known as, well, the full name is the World Association of Major Metropolises, of which Gauteng and the city of Johannesburg are both members. And then professors Ellen Mabin, Bruce Malado, Letitia Rispel, Mark Orkin, and Paul Fati, who have all contributed in some way to this particular survey. And of course, everyone else who has actually worked, but I thought it is really important to mention those particular names. So now we are just, well, we're about running a few minutes late, 2 or 3 minutes late, nothing really serious. But obviously, we'll have to very much keep to time, and we move on to our panel discussion. We have a great panel of respondents, and in the order that I'm going to talk, I will call them up individually. So firstly, Professor Nick Spall, then followed by Councillor Aletta Mashiro, Mr. Ray Hartley, and Dr. Ayodele Odomola, right? Each will be given something like 10 minutes. And I think once you are running out of time, I'm going to sort of do a bit of a wave or something, or bong. But let me introduce firstly Professor Nick Spall, who is the principal investigator of the Nidscram survey, and is an associate professor of economics at the University of Stellenbosch. His research interests are education policy in South Africa with a focus on inequality and early grade literacy and numeracy. Nick founded something called Funda Wande, Reading for Meaning, which is an influential non-profit organization focusing on early grade reading and mathematics. Nick comments regularly in the media and advises policymakers in government, as well as decision makers within philanthropies and NGOs in South Africa. So, and this is quite important, aside from the NIDS survey, which is more long running. He then added the Corona Rapid Mobile Survey. So in 2020, Nick initiated something called the National Income Dynamic Study - Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey, also known as Nidscram, which is a nationwide consortium of more than 30 researchers from 6 universities to measure the impact of COVID-19 in South Africa. This has generated something like 67 research papers in less than a year, which is, I can tell you, a phenomenal achievement, and has been cited amongst others by President Cyril Ramaphosa. So drawing on this scholarship, and this is what we would like Nick to talk about, we are interested to hear from Nick as our first respondent about his view of our survey. I have 3 interrelated questions. Firstly, we know that the Nidscram survey is conducted differently. It's methodologically different from the Quality of Life survey. So can you give us a sense of the differences? Secondly, given the methodological differences, we are interested to hear whether the results differ in any way, or is there some kind of consistency? And what does the data say to us as a province and as a country? Thank you very much, and over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Rashid. And I'll just take a note of the time to make sure I don't go over. So firstly, just a big congratulations to the whole GCRO team. I mean, it's a phenomenal achievement to get the level of detail that you have on a single province. And I'm sure that there are many people in Gauteng government and in civil society that are very glad that you guys have collected this data, particularly in a time of COVID. So let me start with your first question, which was asking about the differences between the Nidscram survey and the GCRO Quality of Life survey. So I think there are 5 main differences between them. The first one is around representativity. So the GCRO data is representative, as you've said, at the ward and the municipal level, and obviously at the province level, whereas the Nidscram data is only broadly representative at the national level, given that it was sampled from the 2017 NIDS study, which Soldru has been running for a very long time. The second issue that's different, or the second main difference, is sample size. So that you have 13,000 respondents or more than 13,000 respondents in a single province, whereas the Nidscram data in the first wave only had about 7,000 respondents. And I went and checked how many were in Gauteng, and we only have 1,074 respondents in Gauteng. So I think maybe that's the first point, is that on almost all of the things that you're measuring, people would be much better off looking at the GCRO data than the Nidscram data. I think that's very clear, given how it's sampled and the level of representativity that you have. The third one is around reference period. So in Nidscram, we typically collect the data over a 4 to 6 week period. It's also a telephonic survey rather than an in-person survey, which it sounds like GCRO is. So your 8 months of data collection compared to the 4 to 6 weeks of data collection that we have in Nidscram means that we are usually much more targeted into one particular part of lockdown, for example, as opposed to a broader segment of 8 months and reflecting over that. And then the last one I mentioned is the mode of data collection. This is an in-person survey, which means that you can cover a lot more topics. And I think that was very evident in the presentations that we heard earlier. It's just remarkable how much data there is there. I saw you've got 214 questions, whereas in the Nidscram survey, we can only have a 20-minute telephonic survey with the respondents. In terms of the similarities and differences, I think that if we start, the vast majority are similarities. Increases in adult hunger, increases in female caregiving, job loss and job recovery, which I'll also come back to, exacerbating inequality and the relationship between food insecurity and depressive symptoms, I mean, all of these are replicating exactly what we found in Nidscram. So I think it's very encouraging that we have this triangulation of different surveys finding similar results, and particularly when there's at a much a bigger sample size in a province like Gauteng. In terms of differences, we did find an increase in child hunger over the same period that you're looking at between 2017 and 2020. There wasn't much of a decline in the number of children skipping meals in Gauteng. Now, again, this is the national stat that we are reporting in Nidscram rather than a provincial stat. So nationally, we found that there was an increase in both adult hunger and child hunger. And then in terms of the other big difference, I think, or maybe it's more of a comment, is just that you reported that 18% of the respondents lost a job since March 2020. Now, because Nidscram is a panel survey where we're following the same respondents over time, we found that 23% of the February 2020 employed were no longer employed a year later, but also that 30% of those that weren't employed, that didn't have a job, now did have a job a year later. So there's a lot of churning that's going on in the labor market. And I think just reporting that job loss stat of 18% sort of underemphasizes how much churning there is in the labor market. So it would also be interesting to look at those that have found work, given that we have this changing labor market. In terms of your third question about what does the data say to us as a province and as a country, I think firstly that Gauteng is very clearly leading the way. I do a lot of work with the Western Cape and advising them on a number of different things, and there's no comparable data like this in the Western Cape. I think that they have been speaking about this to say, the Nidscram data is so helpful, but it's not provincially representative. So I think the people that initiated this quality of life survey and recognizing that policy making and the budget and the implementation of policy is happening at a province level, and ultimately that's where we need the data. And the fact that this goes all the way down to a ward level on critical issues like hunger, schooling, mental health, violence. I was completely shook by the information that you shared on violence, on the rape statistics, that these are 20 times higher than those reported by the police. This gives us so much sobering information that we need to deal with as a country. And I think particularly as we come up to an election, the levels of household satisfaction with national and provincial government, if I was advising a political party at this point, I would be not running for the hills, but giving some very strong worded advice in terms of what needs to change between now and when those elections happen. So I think maybe in closing, just to say that I think that in a democracy, this sort of information is critical for civil society to have this information, for researchers to have this information, for other people to be able to do research. I went and checked, and I see that the data is freely available on the Data First website, which is really great. And I'm looking forward to getting that data and looking at it. But I think that last presentation, the one that we've just seen on the perceptions of people within Gauteng, I think what it's showing us is that declines in quality of life, declines in service delivery, and we're only focusing on Gauteng here, but I think we would see very similar things in a lot of other provinces, if not all the provinces, over the same period, and that those are likely to be punished in the elections. I think that correlating the results that you're finding with the kinds of changes in support and as well as election attendance would be very interesting. And I think this data is going to be incredibly powerful in the next 2 years. So a huge congratulations to the team that collected this data and has made it available. And I think it's very encouraging as a research community in South Africa that we have such high quality data that's being collected so rapidly and at such a high level of granularity that it can go down to the ward level. So yes, thanks everyone.
Yeah, no, Nick, I think thanks very much. I think that was, I think it's always useful to hear what people in the industry have to say. And I think it's really encouraging. So thank you for the kind words. And I'm sure the entire GCRO team, will be very happy to hear about that. Also, I think the points about, the decline in service delivery. I think our next speaker is Councillor Aletta Mashiro, and I know that she will be talking about some of these matters. So let me introduce her. Councillor Aletta Mashiro is the chairperson of the South African Local Government Association, SALGA, in the Gauteng province. She's a councillor in the city of Ekurhuleni, where she is the chairperson of the Water, Sanitation and Energy Section 679 Committee. That's the oversight committee that oversees the work of the executive, in this case, the mayoral committee. So, and I'm sure that Councillor Mashiro will provide us with a perspective on the survey results for local government specifically. I mean, there was a lot that was said about municipalities. And of course, I think that, as Nick was saying, we have imminent local government elections. The date has been, has been put forward by the minister as the 1st of November. So there isn't too much time. So what we would like Councillor Mashiro specifically to talk about is to say, how can local government recover? And this is not only about the city of Ekurhuleni, it's about local government in Gauteng as a whole and perhaps in the country. How can local government recover from the challenges posed by the pandemic? How can we ensure stability and social cohesion in the light of the July turmoil that we saw in KZN and parts of Gauteng? And we need to support provincial and national initiatives to revive the economy and address declining levels of service delivery. Now, I know this is a bit of a mouthful, and I don't expect Councillor Mashiro to deal with all of that in 10 minutes, but perhaps she could touch on some of them. Thank you very much. Over to you, Councillor Mashiro. You have 10 minutes starting now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greetings to all of you who are. I hope I'm audible enough. Good morning.
Yes, you are. Please go ahead. You are.
Okay, then. Thanks. Good morning to the Premier, fellow panelists, academia, the GCRO board members, staff, and all the people who made this webinar to be a success. I want to greet you all. I will not go to the speech that I actually prepared, but I will go to the pointers that you are indicating, just noting the time that has been given to us. But then the first question that you're asking, and maybe the expectation thereof, is to how are we going to revive or maybe recover from the impact of COVID. I'll just couple it with that one of the instability that was caused by the looting and also the attacks on the businesses that we have. Several municipalities on this regard, I think maybe the survey, when you were doing the survey, some of the inputs actually touched on that. To say that the impact is very much negative, people have lost jobs, even the looting itself and also the destruction of the infrastructure that we had and also the economic nodal points that were a feeder which were providing for employment were also impacted by this, and people lost jobs due to that. So it's nearly equivalent from both COVID and also that in the political instability that we experienced. How do we assist municipalities to recover from it? You know, the main challenge is that the municipalities that we have do not have a budget base that we can say that this has been awarded to the municipalities, but municipalities has to source for themselves most of the time, and also if and only if, when provided for, grants from both the spheres of government in assisting in some. But the model that we encourage as SALGA and local government association is that all the municipalities themselves, they know the impact, and we have did the survey ourselves as municipalities to say at this level, this is where we are. And then the only part that can assist is to work in partnership with all the stakeholders within our own place of stay, be it our local businesses, your SMMEs. The most important part, especially for our SMMEs, for them to be revived. I don't know, it's going to be a challenge because most of them were uninsured, no insurance. They still depend on the state to actually afford them a social package for them to resuscitate themselves. The other thing that I think municipalities should actually embark on in ensuring that they provide for those revival of the economy is to have some sort of relationship with the banks, I would say the financial institutions, and other structures that can afford that, that are registered. Because normally what's expected, especially in poor communities, are collaterals which are not there. The businesses that they run are the hand-to-mouth kind of businesses, most of them. Very few are the ones that are sustainable to the level where you can say it's level 3 when it comes to that segment of the economy. I won't dwell much on that, but also the other thing that is of importance is the COVID response, and also the stigma that is related to it. We still can experience more deaths when it comes to the COVID impact. We still can experience more negative impact when it comes to the social aspects that people are actually experiencing from day to day because of the stigmatization of the COVID and especially the vaccine itself, let alone if there is any cure that is actually feasible or is there to come. So we still are going to depend on you as you do your research, maybe as institutions of higher learning and research, maybe you will guide on this one. But let me tell you, it is still a challenge. The stigma goes on and on and on vaccine, and we are still experiencing people who do not even want to adhere to the protocols. So that on its own, it's a challenge. And the other thing is to issues of service delivery. A presentation that I caught up with, the one that talks to social cohesion especially. This one, I'll just try to partner it with that one of service delivery issues. Pieces of legislation that we have as municipalities don't help us a lot. One is the issue of immigration. When people come to townships, they become the responsibility of municipalities. Bearing in mind that their basic needs, they are constituted. They are there in your constitution where services must be provided for. Quoting from section, I think it's 152 and 153 of your constitution that says that people should have access to clean water and sanitation. And you go to the Bill of Rights, they've got rights as well. But those are dependable on municipalities to provide for. Then you come to a state where, I'll make an example with water. People are supposed to access water as a basic right. But that water is being configured somewhere, and that tariff is being determined for municipalities somewhere else, regulating municipalities on the tariff charge and also on how to do credit control and how to collect. Little is being done to ensure that the influx of population that comes to their townships is being responded to. I would have loved to see embassies taking responsibility of its own people, especially whether they are illegal or legal. Because when the state made pronouncements, especially on national, I'll make another example again, that as per constitution, you must provide water. You'll find those people, especially who come from our neighboring countries, bold enough to make some informal settlement somewhere, then the municipality must provide services for. So it forces municipalities to have cross-subsidization. The one who pays must now enable the municipality to pay for rainwater so that water can be provided for in bulk for every citizen. But little do we know that municipalities sometimes they've got their own financial challenges and nobody's taking responsibility for that. Health issues in clinics, they are also a burden on themselves, not only to the municipalities, but also nationally, because they go to your local clinic where primary health care is free, by the way. And sometimes the influx you have, again, people not only from Gauteng, but also people who are from cross-border or even outside South Africa. Municipalities must afford those people treatments for their illnesses. And it has started with COVID. Now we can see that even the clinics are drying out of the basic flu treatments. It's not there, but people, we've got an influx of people, which the state South Africa does not have, which we do not have. It's an estimate that we have, we don't have accuracy. It's just a pity that we want to say elections determine the kind of government or the person who's supposed to rule or the party that's supposed to rule. It becomes questionable to say, what are the statistics of your own municipality or of the state? Let's just generalize it. You have this Guatemala or Davidton location with so many people in it, so many informal settlements, but the reality is who and how many people are inside a shack, basically. We've got a high rate of teenage pregnancies, which is also going to have another impact and a burden to the state and also on both the infrastructure, the social services, service delivery that you are talking of. They are just going to be burdened because you still have to give free and compassionate services to them. So the social cohesion that we talk of maybe, how do I relate to you racially? I think South Africans, they are finding themselves. And I want to thank God for that because we don't look at each other racially that we did 30 years or 40 years ago. There's that little change that is coming. We are now afforded, that opportunity of treating each other like sisters and brothers. The only dimension that is now left are attitudes, which are based on a persona, as to how a person themselves, they treat each other or the society that you come from. I want to thank the webinar for actually doing, and especially the volunteers that we had who were doing door-to-door, was streetwise enough to gather this information and say to them, I've been in other countries where partnerships with institutions and local governments are made compulsory. Before any policy of local government can be changed or transcended to be made a law or a bylaw, first of all, universities or students from the very relevant stream will also evaluate that policy and have an input on it. And that assists not only for the local government to have the design or the model to say if this bylaw is implemented, this will be the impact. But it also assists on perceptions that are created immediately after the bylaws are being created, because we'll go to communities procedurally like we want to process the laws as municipalities. But you find that if they are not thoroughly researched or inputs that not come from different kind of stakeholders, it only befits one foot and the other foot does not have a shoe. And an individual only has 2 feet. So you find that we only addressed the left shoe and not addressed the right shoe. So all I'm saying is that I appreciate this, but I think we can do more based on this. And we've got an expectation also as municipalities or as the association of local government from the Gcro as well. Much as we appreciate and we are willing to work, even moving forward with yourselves, there are other things that we actually want to propose to yourselves that we wish we can carry them through and work together on that. We need to work together in transforming local government institutions internally, in ensuring that it can have more effectiveness drive and do service delivery models that are developmental. We need to mobilize resources, and we would need to help each other on this one. People have lost jobs, and for us to afford them quality of life, money is, let's not be shy to call it money. Money is money. We must not, try to sugarcoat it and say finances. We need money to run the state. We need money. But we've got some impediments. We've got some challenges when it comes to money, non-payments, corruptions, people who are connecting to grids unlawfully. But those are challenges that we have to deal with, and we need your assistance also in ensuring that our communities are empowered. And when I mean empowered, little knowledge sometimes can compromise an individual or a society. But if we share knowledge amongst each other, have our brown bag sessions with our communities, especially the youths, gone are the days where a profession was only for teaching, nursing, policemen for a black man, nothing more. Today, there are diverse curriculums. But if we assist one another with ensuring that our children experience more diverse opportunities and are developmental in their own thinking, we can go far. And I want to appreciate your group, which actually had also a scale on this one. I think I'm going to take it through and also present it as if I was part of them. I'm very much excited about this. Integrating across all departments, with yourselves, especially the institution, tertiary institutions, integrating what we have and what you have. Say, for instance, we can have something on electricity. As you know now, we've got the new model that has been approved of having your greenhouse gases, your climate change impacts that you see. Now you can also have alternative energy sources, generators. You must pardon me, sometimes I'll cut off again. We've got load shedding here.
Councillor Mashiro, I think on that note, can we ask you to round up, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have to, because I'm in the dark now, as you can see. I can't even see my speech anymore, what I wrote on my own. But let me appreciate you and this, and I hope it's not the last time. We will have a way of having a participatory roundtable where we can actually pursue the outcomes of this webinar. Thank you very much to everyone, and God bless you.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Councillor Mashiro. I think you took a little more time than we were hoping, but I know I did ask you, no, that's fine. I think it was partially my fault in that I asked too many questions, whereas you'll see the other participants, I think, had a much more focused questions. So, but that's okay. I think it gives us a sense of the breadth and the complexity that local government is facing. I mean, I worked for at least 16 years in the city of Johannesburg as an official, and I know how complicated local government can be. In the early years, we used to call it, or Jay Naidu famously called it, the hands and feet of the RDP. And indeed, it remains that kind of role. But of course, I think the concern that is coming through from the data of quality of life is showing that the hands and feet are getting progressively hobbled, and we need to basically address that. And I think you've raised many issues around partnerships, and basically, evidence-based approach to policy making. I think that is certainly something that we could pick up in conjunction with SELGA in Gauteng. So, colleagues, just to move on to our next speaker, and he is Mr. Ray Hartley. Ray is the Deputy Director of the Brenthurst Foundation, which was founded by the Oppenheimer family. The foundation's mission is to strengthen Africa's economic performance through events, policy advice, and thought leadership. It's based in South Africa, so a lot of the work is being done on focusing on the challenges, confronting this country, but also the rest of the continent. Ray himself is a former anti-apartheid activist in NUSAS and the UDF. He has enjoyed a very distinguished career in journalism. I was intrigued to read that he was a boxing correspondent for the erstwhile Weekly Mail. And that's because I was even more intrigued in the early years, in the 80s, when he was preceded by the activist and journalist Gavin Evans, who did the same thing for the Weekly Mail. So, I thought that was very interesting that there was this tradition. And I always read the Weekly Mail in those days, but I guess I didn't sort of absorb the byline. Of course, I did absorb the byline later on when he edited very prominent South African newspapers and online publications like the Sunday Times, the Times, the Rand Daily Mail in its new incarnation, and Business Live. And he's been the author of several books, but I think his most important, and I think some of it he might be reflecting this morning or this afternoon, is called Ramaphosa, the Man Who Would Be King. So the Quality of Life survey shows us the effects of a stagnant economy on households with very high levels of unemployment and poverty. So our audience will be very keen to hear about Ray's recent work at the Brenthurst Foundation, where he argues that without growth, development is impossible. He proposed 3 imperatives for President Ramaphosa to do by the end of this year to kickstart what's called a new trajectory scenario without waiting on anyone else. So, Nick, can you perhaps talk to us about these 3 imperatives and within your 10 minutes, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that introduction, slightly over the top. Congratulations. I think it was a fantastic survey. The depth of information and the credibility of the information because of the large sample is always outstanding. I mean, I think you cannot say that you don't know what is happening in Gauteng. I'm just going to talk briefly. I mean, I think that if you look through all of those statistics and you look at the recent unemployment figures and so on, what clearly emerges is that there is a very highly vulnerable portion of the population that is economically excluded, and then this portion is growing. And economically excluded, but also choosing to politically exclude themselves. If you look at the larger and larger number of people who do not participate in formal electoral processes, like elections, for example. So what emerges very clearly here for me is that, we've had 25 years, and you could say that over the last 25 years, we've conducted we could look at it as, say, we conducted a large-scale countrywide experiment in trying to grow and develop the South African economy. And if we look at the outcome, we have to say that that experiment has failed. There is a section of the economy which clearly continues to function, even though it is under threat and is not growing very fast. The established kind of larger business community in the country, and that's why I think there's some resilience there with employment in certain sections of the population. But beyond that, I think the country has failed to create really a new dynamic business sector, particularly emerging out of small businesses. And if you look at the COVID experience there, it's very clearly mapped out. I think very low cash flows, lack of access to financing, and encountering a highly regulated environment, and sometimes lockdown regulations that are, don't consider fully the impact on small businesses. So, for example, telling a restaurant that you'll be closing from tomorrow has severe implications for them, because obviously they have supplies that have been procured for the following week and so on, which then go to waste. And these are very marginal businesses, and one of the shocking statistics for me there was the high number of businesses that have closed and will not reopen. So something has to come out of this, I think, about how do we stimulate, get those small businesses growing. And I think the answer has to lie in finally tackling the question of overregulation in the small business sector and in new entrepreneurs. I think that the barriers to entry, finance and otherwise, are too heavy. And in South Africa, you have a remarkable thing where in areas of the economy where the barriers to entry are low, the youth actually enter and perform very dynamically. So, for example, in music, in the arts, in film, all of the stuff which is digitally enabled, the barriers to entry to come down very significantly. There's a flourishing new entrants into the market that are doing incredibly well. But in other parts of the economy, you have very established businesses that are somewhat controlling and have make it really hard to start out. So, the three things that I recommended, sort out the energy problem. I think energy is a major factor, the cost of energy and the availability of it. It's an obvious one, but also do that without all the caveats and qualifications which constantly accompany it, regulatory and otherwise. And then I think to deal with the way in which collective bargaining agreements are imposed on non-parties. So, for example, you have a situation in South Africa where these agreements are reached at a national level between very large trade unions, very large businesses, say in the metal sector, but those same agreements are then imposed on very small businesses that are operating or trying to operate or trying to start up. And they simply cannot handle the regulatory burden that's imposed on them. And so you have a very high attrition rate of small businesses. And finally, I think, reducing the regulatory steps to starting a business, and just as a sort of argument, really rhetorical point, maybe reduce those steps to 3, and maybe introduce something which has been tried elsewhere quite successfully, which is that if you apply for these licenses and you do not receive a response within 30 days, the application is deemed to be successful until government responds. So that kind of initiative, I think, just opening up the territory for new entrants into the business market is absolutely vital in this environment. I think social exclusion and youth exclusion, particularly in the economy, is a major threat. And political exclusion or self-exclusion, decisions that are taken by youth are a major threat, really, to the future viability of the country. So I'm going to just leave it at there. No, that's you're running a little bit behind, so I'll help you with cutting off at that point. Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ray. I think some of those, I think we really have to move. I think our job, obviously, is to analyze a sense of what is going out there. But, even the GCRO is moving in the direction of beginning to think about what are some of the ideas, policy prescriptions, and so on that can actually get our country to move forward. And so certainly I think some of the issues that you've raised are really, really important to pick up as part of that overall discussion and debate. And doesn't only apply to national level. I think issues around small business development is something very close to the heart of policymakers in Gauteng as well. So now we move to our final respondent. So just give me a moment. I just want to do something here. Okay. Our final respondent in this part of the program is Dr. Ayodele Odomola, who is the resident representative of the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, in South Africa. He's a Nigerian national and holds a PhD in economics from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. As an economist, Dr. Odomola focused on dynamics of macroeconomics and development economics pertaining to the African continent. In addition to being an African visiting scholar to the IMF in 2002, Dr. Odomola had served as a consultant to a number of global and African multilateral organizations. He was previously the chief economist and the head of strategy and analysis team for the UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa, where he coordinated economic, social, and environmental dimensions of development on the continent. The UNDP's strategic plan, 2018 to 2021, has been designed to be responsive to the wide diversity of the countries it serves. The diversity is reflected in three broad development contexts. Firstly, eradicating poverty. Secondly, structural transformations. And thirdly, building resilience. So I'm aware that the UNDP in South Africa has done some analysis of the impact of COVID-19. So Dr. Ayodele, can you give us a sense of the following? Is the quality of life survey consistent with what you found in your own work? Secondly, what programs do you believe government and society at large should do to eradicate poverty, move to structural transformation, and build resilience? Again, a bit of a mouthful, and you don't necessarily have to focus on all of them. But also, I think we would be interested to hear on UNDP's African and global response to the coronavirus pandemic. Over to you in 10 minutes, please. We unfortunately are running, over time at the moment. Thank you, Dr. Odomola.
Thank you very much, Rashid. I think this is a very novel event, and I want to use this opportunity to really say good afternoon to the Honorable Premier, Honorable David Makura, also the program directors, the Gcro board members and former executive directors, panelists, invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I just want to really say a big congratulations to Gcro for this quality of life survey, which I personally found to be of high quality in terms of data and also in terms of the approaches that follow international standards. I really, really believe this will help a lot in providing the basis for evidence-based policy making and also in setting the pace for other provinces and municipalities in the country in terms of, getting evidence that could be used to really inform policy making. And I just want to also underscore the fact that quality of life is something that is very dear to United Nations Development Programme, because this is essentially what informed the development of Human Development Index in 1990, and also what led to the Multidimensional Poverty Index and the formation of the Multidimensional Poverty Practitioner Network with University of Oxford in 2010. And we strongly believe that wherever the quality of life index is having some element of deficit, it becomes the hotspot of conflict and civil unrest. So meaning, providing evidence for this provides also opportunity for us to do the right thing to ensure that we address issues of conflict and unrest in the society. And also, just to start with the question that Rashid mentioned, in terms of the similarities or consistency with what UNDP has done. In South Africa, we've done about 3 different studies. The first one is the Socioeconomic Impact Assessment. The second one is the Rapid Emergency Needs Assessment in terms of the impact. And the third one is on the social and governance dimension of COVID-19 in South Africa. With respect to the issue of consistency, I strongly believe that there are a lot of similarities in the work UNDP has conducted on behalf of the UN in South Africa and the quality of life that Gcro is really launching today. I just want to bring out about 5 key messages that really align. The first key message of the socioeconomic impact assessment we did really shows that it will take about 5 years for the economy, the national economy, to return to pre-COVID level unless something extremely innovative is done. The second key message relates to the gender, the geographical, the education, and the household side and form of employment that determine the poverty incidence as a result of COVID-19. And it really shows that the incidence is highest on female-headed households. And I can see this resonating from the data that has been launched today. And also, the third key message, which again brings some kind of alignment, is that about 54% of households that were pushed out of permanent job to informal jobs after the stimulus package are likely to fall into poverty, and they had it hit as semi and unskilled workers. And I'm so much happy that dealing with the issue of recovery would have to do a lot of we have to do with small business development. And the fourth key message, which again aligns with what is coming from the Quality of Life survey, is that COVID is complicating income exclusion with the highest incidence on the Black, the Africans. And the beauty of it is that if you look at the impact introduced as a result of the use of technology-based educational system, most of the time students that are in cities are able to go to school virtually, but those in rural areas are not. This is creating additional inequality that is going to last for a very long time, and we need to really do something around this. The last key message, which I see as some element of consistency, is that there's no silver bullet policy action. It requires combined innovative policy actions for the impact of COVID-19 to be fully addressed. And on this, I think there's need for us to really look at what can be done in terms of the second question. I look at what we need to do. First, pandemic is a clarion call to address the existing structural challenges through the SDG lens. It exposed the old socioeconomic challenges, poverty, income inequality, as well as the level of unemployment. It really shows that development policy should strike a balance among economic, social, and environmental pillar of development. We shouldn't focus on one at the expense of the other pillars. The second thing is to look at the pandemic implications on urban and spatial planning, particularly in Gauteng. One, we have to avoid polar extremes in human settlement planning, meaning we don't want to have a situation where we have Santon City on one side and Alessandra Township in another. I think this is one of the things that will help us to really find a way of making sure the gap is really, really filled. And also there's need for us to, while commending Gauteng in terms of its commitment to the issue of smart city agenda, I think this is something that is really good, and I want to really commend that we need to really go along this line, bearing in mind that COVID-19 protocols cannot be observed, fully observed in informal settlements. So there is need for us to really reduce this and remove this within the province. The third one is about the implications on how pandemic will transform city and urban governance. It really shows that there is need for us to really, one, mainstream quality of life, which has been published, which is now launched today, into provincial development policies. And we need to use this quality of life to drive economic, social, and environmental transformation. We strongly believe this will help us to really do something, things very differently. And in this regard, I would just want to say there is need for us to really adopt cutting-edge innovation for productivity enhancement without compromising labor absorption. The need for us to build on what the government is currently doing in terms of sustainable transport and also renewable energy, issues like solar, focusing on circular economy, and also waste to energy initiative. I strongly believe this will help a lot in reducing the gap. And also in promoting innovative financing model. Today, about 70% of 1.7 trillion that developing countries are supposed to use in terms of annual investment is going to cities. So for Gauteng, I think there's need for us to really promote innovative public-private partnership, building on concessions and how can we expand it, and also the use of asset recycling as a tool of innovative financing model to promote business development. And also building the resilience is the third thing which I think is really very important for us. And one, we need to focus more on early warning system, particularly so that what happened in July, in July will not reoccur itself. We need to focus on nature-based solutions, particularly ecotourism and the like in the province. And we need to de-risk investment through a lot of things, particularly reducing the overregulation of the small-scale businesses. This is really clear. And also, we need to really see how can South Africa improve on its what they call ease of doing business, which is currently 67% compared to 81% in Mauritius. I think we need to really see how can South Africa be among the best 50 countries in the world on ease of doing business. This will help a lot in transforming this process. And on the last question Rashid, is that UNDP, in terms of what UNDP is doing both globally, but let me focus on what we are doing in South Africa. The global approach is for us to prepare, respond, and recover. And our focus is how can we work with countries to build back better and stronger. And that's it. In terms of preparation, one, when it started March last year, we reprogrammed all our activities to support COVID-19 initiatives. Second, we harmonized all the communication system to ensure that contradictory communication is not going to the public, not to confuse the public. Third, we promote effective coordination so that activities are effectively aligned. The second one about response is the distribution of PPE to all the provinces. And I personally was involved in this, and particularly the one we distributed to the city of Johannesburg and city of Swane. So this is part of what we do, and also the support to the National Disaster Management Center to enhance its coordination function in the period of COVID-19. And just we will be, last month we wrote to the Department of Health in terms of 15 autoclaves. We are providing to 3 different provinces to really deal with, to manage what we call materials used to dispose of COVID-19 materials. The final one is about recovery. There are so many things we are doing in the area of recovery, but I just mentioned one, the partnership we are doing with SAGA nationally, which has covered all the provinces. The partnership with SAGA is to help informal traders, informal sector workers to recover quickly. And we just about last month, we've been able to touch a number of them, particularly giving them voucher to restock and giving them voucher to really kick off their process, and also producing informal tailors, for instance, producing masks and be giving it to communities that cannot afford them. That's one of it. The second one is the low-cost internet access, which we launched in 4 provinces. The idea is for us to get youth entrepreneurs, South African entrepreneurs, and be able to roll out low-cost internet access in communities that never experienced them. We've launched it in Eastern Cape, and we've launched it in KwaZulu-Natal, and we intend to run it all over the 9 provinces before the end of next year. And also in terms of skill development, there are so many things because we strongly believe recovery is focusing more on small business development. And this is a lot of things we are doing in terms of wind energy technology technicians, which we are working with SAWEB and Saratech in Cape Town. Also in automation skills in partnership with the government of Japan, where we have selected 3 TVET colleges to build what they call global rated automotive skill for us to really engage our youth in post-COVID era. This is what we're doing, and we have a lot of initiative we're doing in terms of the annual MME Summit with Department of Economic Development of Gauteng. It's really something we do on a regular basis to support SME development, share experiences, and ensuring that this is done. In conclusion, I just want to say a big thank you for this opportunity, and we are ready to work with the Gauteng province to advocate and popularize the importance and measurement of quality of life, and its linkages to human development indicators and sustainable development goals. And particularly, we're ready to work with you to champion voluntary local review, which is something that was championed by New York City in 2018. And possibly we are ready to work with you to see if it is possible in the 2022 United Nations General Assembly to really showcase the good thing Gauteng is doing in terms of quality of life to the rest of the world. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ayo. I think that was really what we were looking for, and I know again I should learn that in future. If you give people 10 minutes, don't give them like 3 or 4 questions, because the kind of the complexity of the work that you do is absolutely phenomenal. Now we have a teensy-weensy problem, and that problem is that the Premier is still stuck in a meeting, an oversight committee in the legislature. This is now democracy at work. If you get summoned by the legislature from an oversight point of view, basically have to go and answer some tough questions. We understand it's a SCOPA meeting, which usually can be even more challenging. So that's where we're at. However, we have been told that there's a standby, and the standby is Mr. Mduduzi Mbada, who's the head of policy, but I don't see him yet on the call. So, and we are in the process of trying to get him online. So I thought that what we could do is just maybe reflect on a couple of things which have been said, and perhaps some of the panelists can actually respond to them. So the one thing I want to pick up, and this is directed at no one in particular, so please raise your hands. And this is a theme that cut across, I think, virtually all of the presentations, and that is one of partnerships. I think that, partnerships, the Gcro is an example of a wonderful partnership between government and the universities. And actually, for the last 13 odd years, it's worked exceptionally well. And I think people around the world, when we go to international conferences and the like, are really amazed that we've been able to hold it together in the way that we have. So, in relation to building the economy, a la Ray Hartley, in relation to fixing the problems of government, Councillor Mashiro, in relation to doing global, continental, and national work, all of that involves some level of partnership. So, can anyone of you basically give me some idea? And I shouldn't forget Nick, because Nick, you were talking about the survey that the Western Cape government was intending to do, and you pointed to the Gcro, and perhaps there is the kernel of a partnership in that particular instance as well. So, any respondent, you want to raise your hands and basically just tell us about partnerships. Why perhaps are they not really successful, and or how they can be successful to deliver the results that they intended to. Okay, right, Nick, please go for it.
Hi, Rashid. Yes, my comment is more on the data side, and it's just to ask or to prod or prompt that the collectors of the data and the users of the data, I think we have a problem in South Africa where those often don't meet. So the people who need to use this information and who would find this information most valuable, sometimes they know it exists, but it's not always in a format that they can consume it. And sometimes it can be too technical. So I think in terms of your question about partnerships, I wonder whether we don't need more. In the US, they call them knowledge brokers or kind of policy players that try to intermediate between the policymaker on the ground that needs to make a decision about service delivery by ward and the Gcro, for example. And whether or not we shouldn't be allocating more time and energy and money towards that interface between, now we've got this great data, who's going to use it and for what, and what's stopping them from using it now.
Okay, no, thanks. I think I don't know, Julia. Perhaps you want to talk about this idea of knowledge brokers. Do you think it's something that the GCRO could pick up, or Graham?
Yes, and thanks, Nick. That's a great point. I very much agree that this is absolutely crucial work, and it's an area that we've really started exploring recently, emerging in part from our quality of life review project over the past couple of years. We're considering a range of different ways to help ensure that our results reach different audiences. Obviously, crucially, policymakers and decision makers, but also very importantly, members of civil society, and indeed the general public as a whole. Given that the data we collect is funded by public money, it seems to me absolutely imperative that we do our utmost to ensure that the public as a whole is able to draw on that data as much as possible. Certainly, we're moving towards, we've opened up the ways in which we share our data itself through Data First, which I think is a positive step, but finding ways to make it interpretable and easy to understand for the citizens of the country broadly is another big process we're working on. One of the things we're really proud of is that we were able to partner with WASI Maps to release a viewer for our quality of life survey 5 results. And I think we'll be exploring similar strategies to help ensure access to the current survey's results.
Okay. I see Mr. Mbada is on the chat. Before we get him, I see there are a number of questions and answers which we're not going to really have time to look at. But certainly, I think there's some, I think, very challenging issues that have been raised, and I think that we will basically try and apply our minds to as part of an ongoing process. But let me hand over to Mr. Mduduzi Mbada. I don't have his biography in front of me, but I know enough about him to say a few words, or more than a few words. I know that he's been a long-standing activist in student and youth organizations, growing up in Soweto. What sometimes somebody said that don't call them anti-apartheid activists, call them freedom fighters. And I think Mdu is certainly in the mold of a freedom fighter from a very young age. And in a way, the Aluta Continua is still continuing in government. I know that he's had a long career, but I think some of the notable things that he's done over time is that he was an advisor to Minister Paul Mashatile when the latter was the Minister of Arts and Culture, and then became the advisor to Premier Makura during the first term of office from 2014 to 2019. And since 2019, he's taken up this and is basically set up the policy unit within the Office of the Premier. So he's coming with that sort of background, and also just to say that he is what you call the architect of Growing Gauteng Together, which is the plan to the year 2030. So Mdu, over to you, and we'd like to hear what you have to say, since you're speaking on behalf of the Premier, but we are running out of time. So I'm going to give you not more than 15 minutes to have your say. Thank you, Mdu.
So thank you very much, Rashid. I am going to try and start my video, but it keep on saying video, select another video camera setting. So as I'm speaking, I'll be trying to do that. I think firstly, ladies and gentlemen, allow me just to congratulate Rashid for having been appointed as the executive director for the GCRO. On behalf of the Premier, allow me to also to thank the Gcro and the team for this wonderful work coming out the Quality of Life Survey, I think the 6th edition. I would like to also say that we can say without any fear of contradiction that for the past few years, when we conceptualized the notion of the Gauteng City Region and invested in the establishment of the Gauteng City Region Observatory, I think that decision is now bearing the right fruits. We are today witnessing this investment, the results of this investment in partnership with the universities, which I think demonstrate the fact that the Gauteng government or Gauteng City Region, its philosophy remains that of evidence-based decision-making. If you allow me also to say that array as opposed to populist decision-making or decision based on whims, but rather appreciating the importance of data, appreciating the fact that if we are to make the necessary qualitative change in the lives of people, we have got to understand what's happening with them in their communities at the most granular level. So the work done by the Gcro on behalf of the Gauteng City Region, its partners, the universities and the South African Local Government Association, gives us an advantage of knowing the tick of our society. But more importantly, it assists us to take decision as to what kind of interventions as policymakers or as this government to attend to in order to bring about the necessary quality of life that everybody deserves to have, but also assist us to address issues of exclusions that are continuously growing, as you were indicating, Ray, but more importantly, help us to bring on board the different critical sectors of society. This year, Premier Makura outlined, I think, critical tasks. One of them was that of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. I must indicate just on this first task, as Julia was saying, at the heart of it was the investment and the contribution of the Gauteng City Region. And what was that contribution? The Gauteng City Region, just as we started the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, invested in the vulnerability index to help us understand as to make certain assumptions about the density of our communities, including knowing where are the most excluded people. Will they be able to respond to issues of social distance and other impacts that the COVID-19 would have brought about? And as a result of that, with that kind of investment and the research that the Gcro produced, it assisted us to develop a very simple but six-pronged multi-sectoral strategy based on the 6 pillars in making sure that the COVID-19 pandemic is addressed in a much holistic manner. So in that fashion, the work that the Gauteng City Region continues to do, but in partnership with the universities, has really assisted us to make sure that even now as we speak, responding to issues of the pandemic, of the vaccination rollout, it is informed by the work that our scientists, but also led by the Gauteng City Region, has been able to guide us. Secondly, the Premier has indicated that one critical aspect we've got to focus on is to get back to the economy, recover the economy, so that we can make sure that those that are economically and socially excluded are brought back into the economy, understanding that the COVID-19 has really affected the most vulnerable sectors of the economy, including the informal sector. As a result of that, also based on what the survey raises and what people are raising, we have been investing a lot to make sure that SMME funding, entrepreneurial funding, those are some of the critical work interventions we want to bring on board. But I think at the heart of it is the partnership with the private sector, because as you all know, that Gauteng City region necessarily is very much dominated by the private sector, and therefore a developmental state has got to invest in partnerships or social compacts that the Premier has been leading, engaging with the private sector, with the current, with the executive, but also with our mayors, to make sure that together we can be in a position to bring about the economy and make sure that the economy of Gauteng continues to grow, but grows inclusively and brings in the most marginalized into the economy. Thirdly, the issue of building integrity, fighting corruption remains a critical aspect of our work as the Gauteng City region. The survey raises that issue very sharply, that indeed corruption is a big issue. And indeed, what it has continuously done, it has impacted on the trust deficit between the state government and the people. And that's why through the open tender system that we think would have lasted during the response to the pandemic as a result of what we call urgent responses to acquiring services. It is something that will continue, because if we do not do that, we are not going to win the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. We are not going to build the necessary trust between the people and the state. But more importantly, I think integrity must be institutionalized, not only in the state, across society, so that together we can be able to say the delivery of services must be done in a manner that is based on integrity, but also must be done in a manner that is not discriminatory, in a manner that brings about everybody on board. It is also important to say that at the heart of the work that the Gcro does and assists us with the issues of quality of life survey, is to come back to an important aspect, Rashid, that of social cohesion and nation building. A socially inclusive or inclusive societies are best in that if we see more people working together, irrespective of race, irrespective of gender and their class, we are likely to have a more productive society. And it is in that context that, again, working and using the outcome of the quality of life survey, we've got to tackle issues of social cohesion or lack thereof, and the challenges that come with it. The issue of gender-based violence, women exclusion, we've come to a conclusion based on the evidence presented to us that it is true that the most affected during this period were women. And therefore, what do we do in addition to issues of the GBV strategy that we've put in place, but also in addition to our ongoing work of welfare to work, wherein we work very hard to take women out of poverty, to take women out of reliance on grant, to actively participate in the economy. These are some of the issues that we have been putting across, but making sure that we're able to realize them so that indeed we can deal with issues of improving the quality of life, but more importantly, of those that are most vulnerable in our society. Let me also say that without this partnership, we are unlikely to respond to the ongoing problems as identified, including based on the findings. One of them is that local government is important. We must build developmental local government. We must make sure, as we were saying, Russia, about what a local government is. Invest in strong developmental local government institutions. And I think at the heart of it is just the notion that without investing in institutions that are developmental, that are sustainable, as what I think Prof. Ayodele would indicate, that the UN system in the recent times would have taken a decision to invest in cities, because cities are an important contributor to the economy, are an important contributor to shaping the quality of life of people. And therefore, as the Gauteng City region, we will continue to work in this manner in order for us to be in a position to use this data to improve the quality of life of the people of this province, or rather of this region, Gauteng City region. We are very much alive to the fact that the Gauteng City region is inclusive of others, because whatever we do here in light of migration, in light of continuous urbanization, many people will come to Gauteng, and therefore we've got to continuously engage using this data, engage national government through the conversation around the division of revenue, the call around issues of equitable share, but I think together also with the private sector, so that we can address some of the issues that Councillor Mashiro was raising. Let me conclude by saying, Rashid, that what we will do from where we are sitting now, we will take, as we usually do, the implementation, rather the findings of the survey into our institutional processes, because the good thing about what has happened now with the survey, it gets released at the time when this administration, it as to what would have been the performance of this administration, including what is it that we must do better in the remaining 2.5 years of the 6th administration. I think working also with national government, but also coming out of this in coming local government elections, what are we going to do together to help improve issues of a strong, stable city region, a strong, stable local municipalities, but also building strong, stable institutions that can withstand challenges of corruption, but also institutions that can help us really bring about a quality of life in the Gauteng city region. So as you indicated, that we have time problems, I really want to say congratulations to the team at Gcro. This work for us is the work that we believe we can also share in terms of the skills that are part at Gcro with the rest of the provinces. Nick, we work very closely with the Western Cape government and the rest of the other provinces, because we believe that whatever we do has got to assist us to respond to the national agenda, that is the National Development Plan as led by President Ramaphosa, including the fact that in our ongoing interaction with other provinces, we have to share experiences. There's a lot we learn from other provinces, but I really think, Rashid, you need to take the work beyond and engage other provinces as to how best we can use the skills and the investment we've made in this province as a learning in other provinces. I think including in the continent as part of the work that we do with Metropolis or the other big cities in the world, working with the UNDP and other critical institutions. With those few words, congratulations, and we're looking forward to making sure that the evidence, hardcore evidence, difficult as it is implemented. We can't run away. This is our reality. Thank you very much, Mr. Sidat.
Thank you very much, Ndu. I think that was a great substitute for the Premier. You're not the Premier, but I think the broad thrust of what the Premier would have said, I think, has certainly come through in your input, which is really, I think, stitching together both the response to the survey and the content of it, but also what a number of the participants had also said. So I think we are basically coming to the end of this part of the session, and it's now for me to hand over to Professor Lynn Morris to do the closing. Thank you very much, Prof. Morris.
Great, thanks, Rashid, and also just for me to thank everybody for for this very important session. I mean, to thank the GCRO, obviously, for all their efforts in gathering all this data, to thank all the panelists, and Mr. Mbada for stepping in at the last minute for this really very rich discussion. And, the data is very powerful, but it's also what we do with the data. And so, there's issues around sharing the data, making the most of the data, and also, implementing, developing some interventions to try and deal with this, is really very important. And so, this is just a slide. I'm not going to read through it, but just really to thank everybody that's really made all of this possible. Institutional support, the research support, the data collectors, And of course, the people that helped us launch this event as well. So really a big team to get us to this point, and let's really make sure that we do, make the best use of this opportunity, because clearly this data shows us that COVID has had a major impact, on our province. And even though we might recover economically in 5 years' time, actually the effects of this are going to be much longer lasting. And so I really also want to pick up on a couple of people talked about vaccination. And so we really need to make a huge effort to make sure that everybody, is vaccinated, because in fact, vaccines, in fact, are as closest to a silver bullet as we're ever going to get. They have shown in many studies now, how incredibly effective they are. They're almost 100% effective at preventing death. All the deaths that we are seeing now are largely in unvaccinated people. And so the sooner we get, vaccines rolled out, the sooner we are going to be able to get back to normal. And my concern actually is that if we're lagging behind globally, well, certainly the global south is lagging behind in getting vaccination rolled out, it's just going to exacerbate the inequalities that we see globally. And so we really are going to get left behind unless we really start rolling out vaccines much more aggressively and actively. So I also also want to thank Rashid. He only took over just 3 months ago. So thanks to Rashid for ensuring, the continuity of the GCRO, because it clearly is uniquely positioned to gather this data, but also to be speaking to the right people to make the best use of the data, because he was previously in the office of the Premier, responsible for planning, and he holds 2 master's degrees in this area, both from WITS, so very well positioned to really take the GCRO forward. And so I also want to thank his leadership. I've also just been asked to mention that there is a webinar series kicking off at the end of the month, just to alert you all to it, the Mapangugwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, or MISTRA, in collaboration with the GCRO. So please look out for that. And also that we are having a press conference at 1:00. It's a different link to this, and it is for the media. So we should, hopefully be seeing some good coverage of this event. And with that, I would just like to thank all of you for joining and staying engaged. I know we had a little bit of drop off, but pretty good. We still have, just almost 200 people who've participated in this event. I think it was up to 300 a little while ago. So thank you all very much for your time and for joining. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.